Hey guys, Ginger here. I know it's been a while since my last upload. I think it's been exactly 3 weeks to be precise. I think I might have uploaded on Thursday last time as well, which is actually quite funny because it wasn't planned. But I've been thinking a lot, as I always do, but now I'm joking. I've been thinking a lot about this point in particular though. I'm not entirely sure why, but it's sort of been bouncing around my mind for a little bit. Obviously it's a fairly new channel, so you don't know much about me yet, but I really enjoy reading. And my favourite book of all time is, well, so far, I'm sure there'll be better ones in the future, but this one's really good, is Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. I've also read 1984, and they're often compared, but I preferred Brave New World because I thought it was a bit more realistic and it seemed a bit more like what was happening. But recently I've sort of had the idea that they're actually both correct, just in different areas of the world. And I don't think that is how it was normally conceptualized to be. It's normally, Huxley was right, or Orwell was right, and then it's going to sort of be a global thing. It's not very common that I've heard it, actually it's never before that I've heard it, that both of them are correct, just in different areas geographically. And so I was feeling very clever with myself for coming up with this idea. So I dug a little bit deeper, and as with all things, when you think you've got a new idea, it turns out someone else has had this idea before. So I'm quickly going to read you an extract from Neil Postman's book, which he actually wrote in 1985, ironically. And it is called Amusing Ourselves to Death. Very, very interesting title, and I intend to read it. But here's the extract I want to read to you, from Postman. Orwell feared those who would... Oh my goodness, I can't get that right. Let me try again. Orwell feared those who would deprive us of information. Huxley feared those who would give us so much that we would be reduced to passivity and egoism. Orwell feared that the truth would be concealed from us, whilst Huxley feared that the truth would be drowned in a sea of irrelevance. Orwell feared we would become a captive culture, and Huxley feared we would become a trivial culture, preoccupied with some equivalent of the feelies, the orgy-porgy, and the centrifugal bumble puppy. In short, Orwell feared that what we hate will ruin us, whilst Huxley feared that what we love will ruin us. And I think that sums it up perfectly. In case you haven't read the books, Brave New World is this sort of very authoritarian dystopia. You might have heard people reference Big Brother in conversation before. It's sort of describing this super... what's the right word? Super locked-down state where the government controls every single aspect of your lives, and it's incentivized by force. So the main character, actually, the book ends very badly for him. He ends up getting captured and tortured, and basically he loses the battle against the state. And the whole book is exploring what life would be like and why Orwell thinks that society is going to become into this form in the future, this sort of authoritarian, like dictatorship kind of thing. And then Huxley, in Brave New World, it's much more voluntary. The people are actually part of the process of creating this, like, ultra nanny state. And it's sort of just taken the idea of doing whatever you want to the utmost extent. In fact, it's taken to such a far degree that stuff like not wanting to sleep with strangers is considered very rude. If someone asks you for sex, you actually have to say yes. If you refuse, it's very, very taboo in their society. It's sort of this transactional thing rather than anything of substance and meaning. And in the introduction to the book, Huxley has a line I really like where he says that the reason for this is because as all the other freedoms erode, the one freedom that will be given to the people is sexual freedom. Because it will sort of override all the others and they won't care that all the others have been lost. And so Brave New World basically depicts a society in which there's this drug called Soma, and instead of having to deal with stuff, you just take the drugs and you feel happy. Instead of having to form deep emotions, the babies are all made in a lab, basically, and bred. Sex is transactional, and it's basically just an ultra hollow society with nothing of substance. And then this is explored by Huxley, introducing a savage into the mix, and things get very interesting from there, like exquisitely interesting. And my favorite passage of all time or chapter of all time, is the chapter between the controller and the savage, where they're discussing the system that they're in and the pros and cons of living with it. And I want fear, I want death, and all that. It's very powerful. I highly recommend you read it. So now to the crux of my thought, essentially. So my hypothesis, if you can call it that, is that the East is basically going Orwellian and the West is going more the Brave New World route. And I think this actually isn't even really that much up for debate. The East obviously being China and their affiliates. And then the West obviously being Western culture, not necessarily West geographically. Although more often than not it is. But so I'm going to read you 3 quotes from 1984. And then I'm going to read a list of things I've made that China is currently doing. And then we'll see if those sort of line up with the description I've given and the quotes I'm about to read. So, and again, this is from Brave New World. Here we go. The ideal set up by the party was something huge, terrible and glittering, a world of steel and concrete, of monstrous machines and terrifying weapons, a nation of warriors and fanatics, marching forward in perfect unity, all thinking the same thoughts, shouting the same slogans, perpetually working, fighting, triumphing, persecuting 300 million people, all with the same face. So they've lost their humanity. They've been forced into this blob of sameness, and there's nothing that distinguishes individual from individual, and they've been forced into it by the threat of violence. So I'm just going to quickly find my other quotes. I did have them all here, but they seem to have disappeared. Excuse me, I will be very quick to find these. Yes, then the next one I wanted to read was this one. Power is in tearing human minds to pieces and putting them together again in new shapes of your choosing. Again, from 1984. And you can see how this quote directly links to the previous quote. That's how you get the army of 300 million people marching together with one face. I wasn't intending to read this quote, but I really want to. I'm going to read it anyway. Don't you see that the whole aim of Newspeak is to narrow the range of thought? In the end, we shall make thought crime literally impossible because there will be no words in which to express it. And so what this here is saying, as you limit the language, it actually also limits people's ideas. So that's why when you see people trying to take words away and change the meaning of language, it's not a trivial thing, no matter how good the intentions are. Because as soon as you start eroding the words people use to describe their ideas, if you take those away, it makes it extremely difficult to articulate those ideas, and then those ideas die. And that leads to bad things. At least from what I've read so far. And then here was my final one. Here we go. Cool. And if all others accepted the lie which the party imposed, if all records told the same tale, then the lie passed into history and became truth. Who controls the past, ran the party slogan, controls the future. Who controls the present, controls the past. So here, obviously alluding to the flow of information. If you can control the information, then you can control what happened in the future, and you can control people's perceptions of the past. One of the big streams of thought running through 1984 is that the past is only really existing in our consciousness. So if you can change our conscious ideas of the past, you're effectively changing the past. Obviously not changing the actions that happened in the past, but by changing people's perception of what happened in the past and telling them things that happened didn't, you are effectively changing the past. And I think there's one more. Excuse me, I know I said that was my last one. Yes, exactly. Here it is. The party seeks power entirely for its own sake. We are not interested in the good of others. We are interested solely in the power. Pure power. So those are my quotes I selected to give you a bit more of a glimpse into 1984 if you haven't read it, and of my first description didn't suffice. Now, with those quotes in mind, I'm going to quickly run through a list of things that China is currently doing. So, let's begin. So, I don't know if you've heard about this or not, but it was somewhat of a big story and then it sort of disappeared. And it's China's public credit system. And the way this works is they track all your internet usage, obviously for Chinese citizens. I don't think they've got it going for the rest of the world yet, but even if it's just China, that's very bad. So they track all the stuff you do online, and then given the sort of content you consume, if you're consuming the pro-Chinese party content and stuff that the Chinese government wants you to be seeing, then you're saying stuff like that online, then your social credit score increases. And if you're doing stuff they don't like, you're watching rebellious videos, you're saying bad things about them on online forums, then your social credit score plummets. And you don't actually have access to the score, but this score plays a very large role in determining which universities you can get into, whether you're even eligible to take public transport. So essentially, if you are what the government would deem a rebel or undesirable, it seriously affects your actual everyday to day living. It affects, public transport is a huge thing. University education is a huge thing. If you can't get into those because you hold different ideas to what the government would like you to, I don't have to explain why that's bad. That seems quite Orwellian to me, so tick. Then you've probably also heard about this, about all the facial recognition technology and basically the mass surveillance state, Big Brother. And what this mass surveillance state does is I'm quoting this line, is monitors the public for dissent. It doesn't sound very good. So, very Orwellian, literally the definition of Big Brother, monitoring the public for dissent via technology. It doesn't get more Orwellian than that, so that's a check. This has probably been forgotten about by now, but it was a year or two ago, they just overthrew Hong Kong, and nothing really happened by force. You can see the videos, there's lots of violence going on, it's actually quite upsetting to watch, but nothing happened, no consequences, so yay. Again, using force to institute your power over other people. Very Orwellian. This power of the state over other people. Very, very Orwellian. Then this one you probably might not have heard about. I only heard about this because I've been researching for this video. China is building, and this is what they are calling it, a Great Firewall. Obviously playing on the Great Wall of China, now it's the Great Firewall of China. And the purpose of this Great Firewall, is to protect the people of China from being exposed to any government criticism from abroad. So, again, controlling the flow of information. What was the quote we read earlier about where I said basically controlling the information controls the minds of the people? What would you call that? Building a great firewall to protect the people of China from being exposed to any government criticism from abroad. So they're just eliminating any dissent to the government from outside the country, and definitely from inside the country, as you can see from the previous points. So check for Orwellian. And these are very bad, all the things we've listed so far. And I might be going on to smaller degrees in the West, but nowhere near as much as this. That's why I've labelled the West as more of the Brave New World kind. And I'll get to that next, but there's still a few more points for the 1984 side of things first. So next, we have silences speech through economic might. So again, you may or may not have heard of this, but all the power that China has over the American movie industries. When Americans want to release movies in China, they have been known to being requested by the Chinese to take away flags of countries China doesn't agree with, like Taiwan. I think it was in Doctor Strange. In the comic books, the main monk person is a Tibetan monk, and I don't know if you know this, but the Chinese don't like Tibet, so they requested that there not be a Tibetan monk in the movie. Excuse me. So Marvel took the Tibetan monk out. And that even affected our version, not only the Chinese version. It was some white lady who became the monk. And then there are tons and tons of examples in this and everything. John Cena was just recently apologizing for recognizing Taiwan as a country, and he apologized in Chinese to the Chinese state or people, I'm not exactly sure. So it's very clear that they have a large degree of control, not even only over their own people's speech, but that it's creeping into other parts of the world purely by the economic might. So check. Now, sophisticated internet censorship system. And then this is, again, a quote. To monitor and suppress public criticism. So remember how before we said criticism from abroad? Now this is the one on the inside, from public criticism. So again, and what do you think happens when you found criticizing the government in China? Well, I'd say that you might have heard of the stories of the Uyghur concentration camps and people disappearing. I'd say that might have something to do with what happens to you if you are caught by the system that is meant to monitor and suppress public criticism. I don't think you just get a slap on the wrist. And even if that's not the case yet, I can't really see it going any other direction, particularly given the fact that we already know that they're committing genocide on the Uyghurs in concentration camps. I mean, you don't really need to give much more evidence than that, so check. And then for my last one is, you probably almost definitely didn't know this, I only learned this because of Michael Malice, but the Chinese government also, or maybe it was Young Lee Park, one of the two, also is responsible for sponsoring the North Korean dictatorship. So I think Orwellian and North Korea sort of are synonymous at this point. I don't even really need to explain myself there. So that's my checklist for substantiating my point that China has gone far more Orwellian than the West. And I think it's quite hard to dispute. And now for why the West has gone far more Huxleyan, far more in the direction of Brave New World than in the order of 1984. So let us start with a very, very hot topic today. And that is censoring ourselves through cancel culture. I didn't read the quotes, so let me do those first. Excuse me. But let me address that point first. So like I said in my brief synopsis of Brave New World, the difference between Brave New World and 1984 is that Brave New World is essentially voluntary, and society does everything that's happening to it basically on purpose to itself, and it's sort of become the status quo. And part of that would be censoring ourselves through cancel culture. And a great example of that in the book would be how it's illegal to have, or not illegal, but impossible to find, like Shakespeare or the Bible. They don't even know they exist. And then the savage finds Shakespeare, and then that is used very much throughout the book. As he uses Shakespeare to argue against the system that they're living in. There's a scene where the savage, excuse me for my camera, there we go. There's a scene where the savage, he fancies this girl a bit in the New Society. He's been taken to the New Society, and he's been reading Shakespeare, and he sees how a man is meant to win the heart of a woman that he wants. So he goes to the woman, and I don't have the exact quotes here for the scene, but essentially he says, how can I win your heart? And she says, you don't need to win my heart, you can have me. And this disgusts him because he doesn't want to just have her, he wants to earn it by an act of valor, and he quotes Shakespeare at her, and he then insults her, and she's confused, and he's confused, and it's because of this total clash of ideology. She's never been exposed to anything other than the insular society they live in, where anything goes, and he's never been exposed to that, so the only thing he's been exposed to is these higher values and constraint. And so it's just a total clash of worlds, and I love that book so much. I really recommend you read it. But now to the quotes. Here we go. On totalitarian control. That's what this quote's about. A really efficient totalitarian state would be one in which the all-powerful executive of political bosses and their army of managers control the population of slaves who do not have to be coerced because they love their servitude. So that ties perfectly into us purposefully censoring ourselves, either people being censored by cancel culture or people self-censoring in fear of cancel culture. because they love their servitude. Population of slaves. So, I know I wasn't meant to read my list yet, but that one just ties in perfectly to the point I accidentally read first. Excuse me, I'm just trying to find the next quote. This one was actually one I was intending to read, but I think I'm going to, because it ties so nicely into that point, and it's quite short. It says, most men and women will grow up to love their servitude and will never dream of revolution. And, like, obviously, how are they meant to if everything is, like, you're concerned of offending people with your speech? You're never ever going to do anything tremendous. I found my next quote that I was intending to read. One believes things because he has been conditioned to believe them. And then my final quote for Brave New World is, and this is a bit from the dialogue I was talking about between the controller and the savage, and it says, but I don't want comfort. I want God. I want poetry. I want real danger. I want freedom. I want goodness. I want sin. So he's rebelling against this perfect system because he can see that it's hollow. And now on to my points. So I've already mentioned the cancel culture and the self-censorship, and I've substantiated that with quotes already, accidentally. But now on to the next point. So a big thing in Brave New World is basically they cultivate their children in labs and discard of the rubbish ones, and the ones they don't like, the defective ones, I think they call them. And so that leads very nicely into a thing that's happening a lot in the West, and that is voluntarily murdering millions of our children via abortions. Totally voluntary, totally abhorrent, very Huxlerian. I'm going to invent that term. And then my next point is that the public is attacking our own freedoms. That is essentially the gist of Brave New World, is the people will cause the system. The public is attacking our own freedoms. And we're doing it in so many ways. I think my next point mentions some of that, yes. So we're begging for more government control. We have news organizations calling for more censorship. We condition our children from the age of like kindergarten into these radical ideologies via the public school system. And it's not past the tipping point yet, but there are a lot of like indicators that it's leaning in that direction, and there's been lots and lots of fierce debate on these topics. And then my final point for the West, becoming more Huxlerian. I really am quite proud of that word. I hope someone hasn't invented it already. That would be quite embarrassing. They probably have. So my last point for the West, leaning more in the direction of Brave New World, would be the continued degradation of our arts and music. It all seems to be getting worse. And we're making it worse because, I mean, people are consuming it, so it's being produced more. It's gone away from high art, I don't know if that's the right way to call it, that speaks to like the depths of human nature and exploring the human condition. And it's fallen into just like pornography and mainstream movies. Our music has just become totally disgusting. Some of it's okay, but the stuff that's popular, especially with the youth, me myself being a very young youth, I don't like it, but my friends like it. It's not good. And I can't see how society is going to get better if this is the sort of stuff that is being fed into the youngest minds of our culture. If you don't believe me, just go to the top charts and listen to like the top 10 rap songs and see how many downloads they have. It's many, many millions. And once you listen to the words, you won't even need to listen to me to agree. So that is pretty much the end of my musing. I hope that was somewhat interesting for you and not too long and boring, and that my struggle to find my quotes and that my mumbling over words when reading passages wasn't too disturbing. I thoroughly enjoyed making this. I hope you found it at the very least interesting. If you agree with me, disagree with me, please leave a comment. I would love to engage with you, and I look forward to leaving many more videos for you guys to watch. So like if you like the video, subscribe if you really like the video, and I look forward to making more stuff for you guys. Thanks for listening to me. Cheers.